Have you ever been betrayed by someone who shared your blood, your childhood, and your dreams? Hit that like button. Subscribe if you believe that family doesn't get a free pass to destroy you, because what I'm about to tell you proves that sometimes the person who steals your legacy becomes the stepping stone to building an empire they could never imagine. My name is Sloane. I'm 36 years old. And the day I walked into my own company as the new owner and fired my brother in front of everyone he'd lied to was the day I finally understood that revenge isn't about anger. It's about becoming so successful that your betrayer has to watch from the sidelines while you rewrite the story they thought they'd finished. But before I tell you about that boardroom, let me take you back to where brotherhood died and business began. I was 8 years old when my father, Preston, taught me and my brother Cameron how to build things. Not just physical structures but ideas, systems, businesses. Dad owned a small construction supply company called Barrett Industries, named after our family. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours, built from nothing by a man who believed hard work was the only inheritance worth leaving. Cameron was 3 years older than me, confident and charismatic even as a kid. He was the golden child, the one who could talk his way out of trouble and into opportunities. I was quieter, more thoughtful, the one who actually read the instruction manuals while Cameron improvised. Dad loved us both, but he saw something different in each of us. Cameron had vision, he'd say. Sloane was executed. Together you two could build anything. We grew up believing that story, that partnership, that destiny. Every summer we worked at Dad's company. Cameron handled customer relations while I managed inventory and logistics. By the time I was 16, I could run that warehouse better than employees who'd been there 20 years. By the time Cameron was 19, he could sell ice to people living in winter. We were a team, brothers in business and blood. When I was 22 and Cameron was 25, Dad sat us down for a conversation that changed everything. "Boys," he said, his voice heavy with something we couldn't identify yet. "I'm sick." The cancer diagnosis came with a timeline. 18 months if the treatment worked. 6 months if it didn't. Dad was 54 years old, and suddenly mortal in a way that terrified us both. He made us promise to keep Barrett Industries alive, to work together, to honor what he'd built by building something even bigger. 6 months later he was gone. The funeral was packed with employees, clients and contractors who told stories about Preston Barrett's integrity. His handshake deals that meant more than contracts. His belief that business should build communities, not just profits. Cameron gave a beautiful eulogy about carrying on Dad's legacy. I stood beside him, numb with grief, and believed every word. The will was straightforward. Barrett Industries was split 50-50 between Cameron and me. Equal partners in every sense. Dad had left detailed instructions about maintaining the business, protecting our employees, and never letting greed poison what he'd created. For the first year after his death, we honored those instructions perfectly. Cameron handled sales and business development while I managed operations and finance. The company grew steadily. We hired more staff, expanded our product lines, and built relationships with bigger contractors. By the second year, we'd increased revenue by 30%. By the third year, we'd opened a second location. Everything looked perfect from the outside. But I'd started noticing small things that didn't add up. Invoices that seemed inflated. Expense reports that raised questions. Cameron taking meetings I wasn't invited to. Making decisions without consultation. When I asked about these discrepancies, he'd smile and tell me not to worry about details. "You're too focused on the small stuff, Sloane," he'd say. "I'm handling the big picture. Trust me." And I did. Because he was my brother. And brothers don't lie to each other about the things that matter most. I was 26 when Cameron called an emergency meeting at the office. He looked stressed, pacing the conference room like a caged animal. "We have a problem," he said. "Big one. One of our major suppliers is suing us for breach of contract. If we lose, it could bankrupt the company." My stomach dropped. How did this happen? "Legal stuff, complicated contract language," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "The point is, we need to restructure some things to protect our personal assets. I have a lawyer who can help us set up a corporate shield. We just need to sign some paperwork." He spread documents across the table, pages and pages of legal language that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. My college degree was in business management, not law. These were operating agreements, corporate restructuring documents, liability waivers. Cameron stood over me, pen in hand, pointing to signature lines highlighted in yellow. Here, here, and here, he said quickly. We need to file these by tomorrow or we're personally liable for millions. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the first signature line. Shouldn't we have our own lawyer review this? I asked. There's no time, Cameron insisted. The filing deadline is tomorrow morning. This lawyer is Dad's old friend. He's looking out for us. Do you trust me or not? The question hit exactly where he'd aimed it. Of course I trusted him. He was my brother. We'd built this company together from the ashes of our father's legacy. I signed every page he indicated, my hand moving on autopilot while my brain screamed warnings I was too loyal to hear. 3 days later, I discovered what I'd actually signed. I was reviewing quarterly reports when I noticed my name was missing from several key documents. I pulled up our corporate filing with estate and felt the world tilt sideways. According to the paperwork, I was no longer a 50% owner of Barrett Industries. I owned 0%. Cameron owned 100%. I'd signed away my inheritance, my shares, my entire stake in the company Dad had built and left to both of us. My hands shook as I called Cameron. His phone went to voicemail. Called again. And again. Finally, he answered with the casual tone of someone who'd been expecting this conversation. Hey Sloane, what's up? What did you make me sign? I demanded, my voice cracking. Cameron sighed like I was being unreasonable. Look, I can explain. There was no lawsuit, was there? I interrupted. No, he admitted calmly. But there was an opportunity. A massive contract with Hillcrest Development. They wanted to work with us, but they had concerns about divided ownership. They wanted clear leadership, one decision maker. So you stole my shares, I said, the words tasting like poison. I didn't steal anything, Cameron replied, his voice hardening. You signed them over willingly. And honestly, Sloane, this is better for everyone. You're great at operations, but I'm the face of this company. I'm the one bringing in the big deals. This just makes the structure match reality. I couldn't breathe. You lied to me. You used Dad's memory to manipulate me. You betrayed everything he taught us. Dad's gone, Cameron said coldly. And his way of doing business died with him. This is my company now. If you don't like it, you can leave. I hung up and immediately called 3 different lawyers. The first 2 gave me the same devastating news. I'd signed valid legal documents transferring my ownership. Unless I could prove Cameron had committed fraud, which required proving he'd intentionally deceived me, the signatures were binding. The third lawyer, a sharp woman named Octavia Chen, listened carefully to my story. This is fraud, she said firmly. But proving it in court will be expensive and time-consuming. It could take years and cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees. Even if you win, the company might not survive the legal battle. Do you have that kind of money? She asked. I didn't. My salary from Barrett Industries was good but not lawyer money. My savings account had maybe $30,000. Cameron knew that. He'd planned this perfectly, trapping me in a cage made of paperwork and my own trust. I showed up at the office the next morning because I didn't know what else to do. Cameron was in Dad's old office, sitting behind the desk that should have been half mine. He looked up when I entered, his expression carefully neutral. Sloane, I'm glad you're here. We need to discuss your role going forward. My role, I repeated. I'm still an employee, Cameron said. You're still valuable to this company. I'm offering you a position as operations manager. Same salary, same responsibilities, just a clearer reporting structure. To you, I clarified. To the owner, he corrected it. The audacity was breathtaking. He'd stolen my inheritance and was now offering me a job at my own company. And if I refuse, then I accept your resignation, he said simply. I have the authority to hire and fire now. It's in your best interest to stay, Sloane. At least until you figure out what's next. I stayed. Not because I forgave him or accepted what he'd done. I stayed because I needed time, information, and a plan. I showed up every day, managed operations, and smiled through meetings where Cameron made decisions that would have been ours to make together. But at night, I transformed into someone else. I studied business acquisition strategies. I researched corporate takeovers. I met with financial advisors and learned about leveraged buyouts, hostile acquisitions, and creative financing. Most importantly, I started documenting everything. Every decision Cameron made contradicted Dad's values. Every expense that seemed questionable. Every contract negotiation where he prioritized profit over people. I built a file that detailed exactly how Cameron was running Barrett Industries into the ground while enriching himself. Over the next 2 years, I watched my brother destroy everything Dad had built. He fired long-term employees who questioned his decisions. He cut corners on quality to boost profit margins. He broke relationships with suppliers who'd worked with Dad for decades. Revenue climbed, but the foundation was rotting. I knew it couldn't last. Meanwhile, I was building something else. I'd started a consulting business on the side, advising small construction companies on operations and efficiency. It was just freelance work at first, projects I did on weekends and evenings. But word spread quickly. Turns out, being forced to learn every aspect of running a company made me extremely good at teaching others how to do it. Within 18 months, my consulting income matched my Barrett Industries salary. Within 2 years, it exceeded it by 40%. I quit Barrett Industries on a Tuesday morning with no drama, no speech, just a simple resignation letter on Cameron's desk. He called me that afternoon, surprised and slightly concerned. "Sloane, what's this about? You said I could leave if I didn't like the situation," I reminded him. "So I'm leaving." "But the company needs you," he protested. "You should have thought about that before you stole my shares," I said calmly and hung up. For the first time in years, I felt free. My consulting business exploded after I left Barrett Industries. Without the constraint of full-time employment, I could take on bigger projects, hire a small team, and build a reputation for turning struggling companies into profitable operations. I worked with construction suppliers, contractors, and developers across 3 states. I learned their problems, their needs, their frustrations with companies like Barrett Industries that prioritized profit over partnership. And I started to see an opportunity that Cameron's betrayal had accidentally created. 3 years after leaving Barrett Industries, my consulting firm had grown into something substantial. We had 12 employees, offices in 2 cities, and annual revenue exceeding $2 million. I'd built this entirely on my own, without Cameron's charisma or Dad's name. Just competence, integrity, and the relentless work ethic Dad had instilled in both of us. But I hadn't forgotten about Barrett Industries. I'd been watching from a distance, tracking their performance through public records and industry contacts. And I'd noticed something interesting. The company was struggling. Cameron's aggressive expansion and corner cutting had caught up with him. Several major clients had left after quality issues. Employees were leaving for competitors. Revenue was declining while debt was climbing. Barrett Industries was slowly dying, suffocated by the very greed that had made Cameron steal it from me. Then I got a call from Octavia, the lawyer I'd consulted years earlier. "Sloane," she said, "I have some information you'll want to hear. Barrett Industries is looking for investors. They need capital injection to stay solvent." "How much?" I asked, my heart rate accelerating. "At least $3 million. Possibly more depending on their debt load." "Who's handling the sale?" "A firm called Rockwell Capital. They're looking for buyers who can provide immediate liquidity." This was it. The opportunity I'd been unconsciously preparing for since the day Cameron stole my inheritance. I had $2 million in liquid assets from my consulting business. I needed more, but I knew exactly where to get it. Over the next 2 weeks, I met with every client I'd helped over the past 3 years. I presented them with a proposal. I wanted to acquire Barrett Industries and transform it back into the company Dad had envisioned. I needed investors who believed in quality, integrity, and long-term relationships over short-term profits. Would they be interested in backing me? The response was overwhelming. These were people who'd worked with Cameron and been disappointed. They'd known Dad and respected what he'd built. They believed in me because I'd proven I could deliver results without compromising values. Within 10 days, I had commitments for $4.5 million. Combined with my own $2 million, I had $6.5 million available for acquisition. I contacted Rockwell Capital and submitted my offer. $5 million for 100% ownership of Barrett Industries, contingent on full financial disclosure and immediate transition of control. The offer was aggressive, lower than the company's perceived value but backed by cash and a credible plan for turnaround. Rockwell scheduled a meeting for the following week. I walked into that conference room wearing a tailored suit that cost more than I used to make in a month at Barrett Industries. The Rockwell representatives were there, along with their financial analysts. And sitting at the head of the table, looking considerably less confident than I remembered, was Cameron. He stared at me like I was a ghost. His face went through several expressions: shock, confusion, anger, before settling on something that looked like fear. "Sloane," he said slowly, "what are you doing here?" "Making an offer to purchase this company," I replied calmly, taking a seat across from him. Cameron looked at the Rockwell representatives. "This is my sister," he said, as if that explained everything. "She doesn't have this kind of money." "Actually," I said, sliding my acquisition proposal across the table, "I do." The Rockwell team reviewed my documents while Cameron sat frozen. His face grew paler as he read the financial statements showing my consulting firm's revenue, the investor commitments, the cash reserves I'd built. "This is insane," he finally said. "You can't just buy my company." "It's not your company anymore," I corrected. "You made that very clear 5 years ago when you tricked me into signing away my shares. Now it's a distressed asset that needs new ownership. And I'm offering to be that owner." The Rockwell representative, a man named Hugh, cleared his throat. "Miss Barrett, your offer is compelling. However, Mr. Barrett has the right of first refusal on any acquisition offers. He has 10 days to match your terms." Cameron's relief was visible. He thought he'd found his escape. "But I'd planned for this." "Cameron," I said quietly, "do you have $5 million in liquid capital?" His silence was answer enough. "Because if you don't, your right of first refusal is meaningless." Hugh looked between us, sensing the personal history crackling in the air. "Mr. Barrett, do you have the ability to match this offer?" Cameron's jaw clenched. "Can get financing." "In 10 days?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "With your current debt load, declining revenue, and damaged reputation. What bank is going to give you $5 million? The meeting ended with Hugh promising to review both the acquisition offer and Cameron's financial position. We'd have an answer within a week. As everyone filed out, Cameron grabbed my arm. His grip was tight, desperate. "Why are you doing this?" he hissed. "For revenge." "For Dad," I said simply, pulling my arm free. "For the company he built that you destroyed. For the employees you betrayed. For the legacy you stole because you were too greedy to share. And yes, maybe a little bit for revenge." Cameron's face twisted. "You can't do this." "Can," I said. "And I will." 6 days later, Hugh called. "Mr. Barrett is unable to match your offer," he said. "The bank denied his loan application. Your acquisition proposal has been accepted, Miss Barrett. Congratulations. You're now the owner of Barrett Industries." The closing process took 2 weeks. Paperwork, financial transfers, legal documentation that made everything official and irreversible. I scheduled my first day as owner for Monday morning. I wanted maximum visibility for what came next. I arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, walking through doors I'd first entered as a child, holding Dad's hand while he showed us the business he was building for our future. The lobby still had his photo on the wall. The reception desk still had his motto engraved on a plaque. "Build with integrity, serve with honor, lead with compassion." Cameron had kept the words but abandoned their meaning. I was about to bring them back. I called an all-hands meeting for 9 a.m. Every employee, from warehouse staff to office administrators, gathered in the main conference room. Cameron stood near the back, his arms crossed, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. He still didn't quite believe this was happening. "Good morning," I started, my voice clear and steady. "For those who don't know me, my name is Sloane Barrett. I'm Preston Barrett's daughter. And as of today, I'm the owner and CEO of this company." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several older employees who remembered me from childhood smiled with recognition and approval. Others looked confused, glancing at Cameron for an explanation. "5 years ago," I continued, "I was tricked into signing away my shares in this company. My brother, Cameron Barrett, used fraud and deception to steal my inheritance." I let the words hang in the air, heavy and undeniable. Cameron's face went red. "That's slander," he shouted. "Have lawyers. Call them," I said calmly. "Because I have 5 years of documented evidence showing exactly how you manipulated legal documents to commit fraud. But I'm not here to litigate the past. I'm here to rebuild the future." I turned back to the assembled employees. "Many of you have been here since my father ran this company. You remember how he treated people, how he valued quality and relationships over quick profits. That's the company I'm bringing back. We're going to honor our contracts, treat our suppliers fairly, and make decisions based on long-term sustainability, not short-term greed." The relief on some faces was visible. These were people who'd watched Cameron's leadership with growing concern, who'd stayed out of loyalty to Preston's memory rather than faith in his son. "But this transition means some changes," I continued. "Starting today, we're restructuring management. Several people who've been making decisions that contradict our values will be let go." My eyes met Cameron's across the room. He knew what was coming. His face had gone from red to white, understanding finally hitting him with full force. "Cameron Barrett," I said clearly, "your employment with Barrett Industries is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. You have 1 hour to collect personal items from your office. Any company property, including keys, access cards, and electronic devices, must be surrendered before you leave." The room was silent. Cameron stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing without sound. "This is my company," he finally managed to say. "Not anymore," I replied. "Now it's mine. And unlike you, I actually earned it." Security, 2 men I'd hired specifically for this moment, moved to stand near Cameron. He looked around the room, perhaps hoping for support or sympathy. But the employees who'd suffered under his leadership just watched silently as he was escorted out. The last thing I saw before he disappeared through the door was his face, a mixture of rage, humiliation, and disbelief. It was the same expression I'd worn 5 years ago when I discovered what he'd done. The difference was, I'd used that moment to build something better. He'd just learned that betrayal has a price, and sometimes that price is paid in front of everyone you lied to. After Cameron left, I spent the next 6 hours meeting with department heads, reviewing operations, and beginning the work of rebuilding what he'd broken. It wouldn't be easy. Cameron had created messes that would take months to untangle. But for the first time in 5 years, Barrett Industries belonged to someone who actually cared about its legacy. That evening, I stood alone in Dad's old office, now my office, looking at the photo on the wall. Preston Barrett, proud and strong, standing in front of the company he'd built from nothing. I'd like to think he'd be proud of what I did, though I knew he'd be heartbroken about why it was necessary. Cameron tried to sue me 3 times over the next 2 years. Each lawsuit was dismissed. The contracts I'd signed were invalid due to fraud, and I had the documentation to prove it. Eventually, he gave up and moved to another state. I heard through industry contacts that he tried starting another business, but his reputation preceded him. Nobody wanted to partner with someone who'd steal from their family. Barrett Industries thrived under my leadership. We rebuilt relationships Cameron had damaged, hired back employees he'd fired, and grew revenue by 40% in the first 3 years. More importantly, we did it with integrity, exactly how Dad had taught us. If this story showed you that betrayal can be the catalyst for building something better than what was stolen, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories about justice, resilience, and becoming successful enough that your enemies have to hear about it. Drop a comment about a time someone's cruelty became your motivation to prove them wrong. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's success so complete that their betrayal becomes the footnote in your triumph story. See you in the next one.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoy watching Karma, Payback, come full circle every week, we dive into tales of betrayal and poetic justice. Don't miss the next one. Tap the subscribe button and join the Revenge Squad.